few items related to the Chesapeake Beach Water Park this evening. So we're going to cover just general background, overview of the history of the park, lay out some goals in terms of an administrative overview of the goals from staff to understand the priorities of Town Council moving forward. We will talk about some of the fiscal impacts, the challenges and unique constraints to the Chesapeake Beach Water Park, and then also talk about looking forward, so steps to move the water park forward, given these constraints. So in terms of the background of the Chesapeake Beach Water Park, obviously it's owned and operated by the town of Chesapeake Beach, and it's the only municipally owned water park in the state of Maryland. The town entered into a development agreement with the Board of County Commissioners in August of 1993 to construct what was termed as a pool. And it was described as a family-oriented community pool of approximately 5,000 square feet. The water park that opened in 1995 is approximately 32,000 square feet of pool area, water slides, fountains, waterfall, lagoon, kids activity pool. So the space of the actual pool is a very large proportion of the parcel of land itself, which presents lots of challenges that we'll talk about a little later. So as part of this development agreement, the town contributed $500,000 to build the Northeast Community Center, and the town also fully funded 100% of the cost to construct and maintain the pool. So in this agreement, the county reserves the right to operate the pool if for any reason the town fails to operate it or assign it to a third party that would operate the pool. And there's a lot of other factors in this agreement as well in terms of the coverage and maintenance from the town related to the Northeast Community Center, also to have that in the center of our town. So the goals of this conversation are to really start the conversation to determine short and long range plans for the Chesapeake Beach Water Park, to really have that conversation and determine if the park is going to be positioned to be supported by general taxpayers for more of economic development purposes, or if we are going to be positioned for community amenity. To also determine short and long range plans for improvements, so staff can have an idea of where Town Council stands on these issues so that we can start planning ahead as significant improvements need to take place at the park, and to provide us with an opportunity to convey to you the funding necessary for the improvements, to convey the funding necessary to support the Chesapeake Beach Water Park's operating costs based on this direction, and to move forward with planning infrastructure repairs and budgeting operating costs based on priorities. So in terms of the fiscal impact of the park, we have obviously multiple areas of costs related to the Chesapeake Beach Water Park. One of those categories is operating cost. This includes all of our human resources and wages. We recruit almost year round. There's significant onboarding and training that is accompanying hiring approximately 170 seasonal employees every year. There's a long range of processes needed to certify our lifeguards. There's obviously utility costs, chemical costs. We have significant professional fees, and obviously ongoing year-round maintenance. In terms of capacity, the capacity level greatly impacts the fiscal position of the park, as we have seen, with the total number of guests in the park greatly impacting revenues. And likewise, the total number of guests in the park also impact our safety and guest enjoyment. Our fiscal year 24 budget, as approved by Town Council, factors in a capacity of no more than 500 guests in the park at a time. Whereas in prior years, we had over 1,000. So there's also some unaccounted cost to the taxpayers that we wanted to mention. And these are really general fund absorbed through the general fund, and they're not accounted for in the water park budget. And this includes staff time that could be potentially used in other areas. It also includes some utility fund costs that have not been recouped. So just to provide a high level of some of the unique constraints of the current design that requires ongoing maintenance, that unfortunately this maintenance has to happen, which costs a significant amount of money. However, our guests don't necessarily see new features or new items at the park that would make them think that there's anything new. However, these requirements and maintenance can persist. And some of that has to do with the design of the park. So like I said earlier, the fact that the proportion of the pool is such a large space, all of the mechanical and plumbing systems are exterior to the pool. And by not having enough space, there's been penetrations to actually the pool deck in order to make this layout work, and that increased cost for maintenance. So you can see here, and Jay's going to give us a better quick overview, but we have pipes that are breaking due to settling as they're connecting to pieces of the park that are on pilings, whereas all the support equipment of the park is not. So as that settles, there's cracking and disconnect from the areas it needs to operate. We're sinking about 1 inch a year in all of those areas, which requires significant repairs to the deck and all the surrounding areas. And this has also prompted the town over the last probably 10, 15 years to abandon several features. So they've reached their useful life, things like slides and dumping water features that guests enjoy that are too cost prohibitive to replace. They reached their lifespan and they've just been unfortunately abandoned. Jay, did you want to provide any overviews that I've not covered here?
I can. If you want to go through it all, then I can, if that's fine.
Okay, so pause.
Sure. So some specific things, and I think the mayor and Valerie remember, we used to have features like the well dump house that was actually poured at the same time as the park that at the time to crane it in there was like $125,000 to replace. So we removed it. There used to be a snail shell slide, same thing. They kind of set it with a crane in the park, and it was around $125,000 to replace that. So we removed it. There's a few other things we abandoned. A waterfall that's by the baby pool, because to cut out the baby pool and part of that deck to remove it was almost $400,000 to access the plumbing for it. And those are some high level things. There's some other things lower level. And maybe when the map comes up with the pilings, I can speak to the rest of it, Holly. But those are some high level things.
Thank you, Jay.
Sure. Oh, there it is there. So I can just keep going. And I've looked at original set of plans, and I've looked at the as-built plans, what we have of them. And if you look on this map, you can see what was piled and a concrete beam was poured, if you will, all the lines that you see with the dots. Outside of that work, the original plans proposed pilings everywhere, but it was value engineered. And, at the time, I'm sure we saved money and we built it a little cheaper. But what's happening, those areas outside over time, just like everything else over there in the swamp, is settling. And some of that infrastructure is in those areas. And it's predictable at this point. It settles about 1 inch a year. But it's one of those things as far as the concrete work around those areas. If you remember back, it used to be sand when you entered into the zero enter areas, and that settled. Then we went to pavers, which are still there. And then since then, in 2006, when I've started, we've actually poured concrete 2 times over that, and where the snack bar is the 3rd time. And it's similar to painting the Bay Bridge, if you will. Once you get to one end, you kind of turn around and go back. And the reason I wanted this chance to speak is I know we've spent a lot of money at the water park, and it seems like we're always coming here with surprises. And I think what we spent wisely, and it's why the park is where it's at today. But I also want to say in the same breath that these things are going to keep coming. Some of these areas, it's never going to go away, just due to the age. And what we did address was some big expenditures we fixed properly, and that will last, but there's still a lot out there is the bottom line. Okay, that's enough on that.
So kind of bearing all of these issues, the town contracted a consultant in 2012, a consultant by the name of Splashtacular, to provide an analysis to the park due to the kind of already aging infrastructure and the desire to define a path forward. So some of those recommendations at that time in 2012 included improvements of $6 million. And they included a major overhaul of the filtration system that, as we said, does not fit the space due to the pool design as being far too large for the parcel of land. They also suggested a capacity increase to 1,400 in the park. And that was suggested in order to repay the cost of the improvements. They also suggested a price increase of 50% for town, county, and general admission. So they made, no separation of who was going to receive the increase. It was 50% across the board. And they also suggested adding program space. So they recommended adding things like an arcade or enclosed space that could operate 365 days a year, meeting space, all things that could bring in revenue throughout the year to cover some of these expenses.
Sure. So we're talking $6 million in 2012 money. Yeah. Okay. Now it's right out there now.
Okay.
Did they factor in operating costs?
No. So that was my next slide. So
Study.
the problem with this study and the payback, so they estimated the payback up to about 18 years to pay back these costs, but they did not account for any of the water park operating costs. So that means, they didn't account for wages, they didn't account for any of the professional fees, chemicals, utilities, maintenance, insurance. None of that was accounted for. So they just took the improvements and factored in, adding that additional cost and additional capacity, what it would be to recoup those costs. And we know that doesn't work because when you add additional people in the park, you double, triple, quadruple staff costs, all of those other operating costs, chemicals, all of those things increase substantially. So also the major factor in this study is that it does not even address in any way safety. So, we have staff that work year round to make sure that we meet safety requirements, and it does not take it into account. So to bring safety to the forefront, we've talked a lot about capacity, and I think it's difficult to understand what the park looks like at each of these capacity levels. So we've taken and we've modeled this specifically to let you see what it looks like. This picture is a standing room. So this does not include any tubes. It doesn't include people being mobile. It doesn't even include staff. It doesn't include our life stand chairs that require a clearance around them. In fact, some of the landings out of the slides aren't even included. But just to give you an idea, this is what 250 people look like in the park. What 500 people look like in the park. And this is our current capacity that we will not go past 500. $750 people in the park. No inner tubes, no chairs, nothing. Standing still. Yes. Yep. 1,000. This is where we were really at, 1,250. So our legal limit in the park, believe it or not, is about 1,300, 1,330. And so we have Martha Kennedy, our park manager, and we also have our aquatics manager, Savannah Richardson, who wanted to give the council just a brief presentation, just conversation on safety implications at the park. So Savannah, thank you for joining us. Savannah works tirelessly year round to make sure that our park, our staff are trained for safety. So thank you for being here this evening, Savannah,
Thank you.
to talk to us about that.
Is this okay? My name is Savannah Richardson, and I am the aquatics manager for the Chesapeake Beach Water Park. I began my employment in 2018 as a lifeguard, and I have worked my way up through management. This is my 6th summer working at the water park. And it became very apparent to me very quickly during my first year that the high capacity levels, even a lifeguard who maintains the correct scanning patterns required from our licensing company, can miss someone in need of help within seconds due to the overwhelming crowd. In 2019, as a head guard, I experienced firsthand what it was like to help treat the magnitude of guest injuries and illnesses while attending the Chesapeake Beach Water Park at our highest capacity levels. The main point that I recall while working during that time is constantly being on high alert. Due to the high number of guests within the water, many people did not want to enter the water at all, which led to guests suffering from symptoms of heat exhaustion. What was considered a good day to management was if there was no vomit or feces for us to clean up, as it was not a rare occurrence at that time. Children were often left unattended and or lost from a guardian or parent, and often gone unclaimed for long periods of time. Through the Aquatics Department's yearly cumulative rescue report, it can be seen that the number of lifeguard rescues has significantly decreased as the park capacity has decreased. Along with the cumulative rescue report, it can be seen that our injury analysis for major emergencies also decreases as the park capacity decreases. As park capacity levels reach above 500 guests, the number of yearly incidents increase drastically. The cumulative rescue report, it goes by yearly throughout the years. The number of people rescued in 2019 were 105, and we had 12 major incidences. What defines a major incident is if we have to use our AED, our oxygen, or if we have to call EMS. In 2020, we had 36 rescues and 3 major incidences. 2021, we had 15 rescues and 6 major incidences. 2022, we had 49 rescues and 0 major incidences. And to this date, to today, we have 8 rescues and 1 major incident. Although all major incidents take an emotional toll on staff, July 3rd, 2019 is a date embedded into CBWP history. It was an extremely busy day, being that it was prior to our lower capacity. It was midday when our aquatic supervisor, Sierra Harrison, heard our emergency whistles being blown. She ran toward the whistles and watched as a CSS lead dragged the body of a 4-year-old boy out of the lazy river. The boy was completely unconscious and maintained a pulse but was not breathing. Once the boy was pulled from the water, crowds began to form. As the aquatics management team was giving the boy oxygen and assessing his breathing, a woman from the crowd snatched the bag valve mask out of one of the supervisor's hands, stating that she was a nurse. The aquatics management team not only had to give attention to the boy's needs, but also to the overstepping crowd. About 4 to 5 breaths later, he regained consciousness. As expected, he was extremely lethargic and had to be flown out from Killam's Field to Children's Hospital. The supervisors from that day recall the screams of his family members and the overly large crowd and how traumatic this experience was. After reviewing the footage, it was revealed that the boy entered the lazy river alone and fell off a tube into a rock where he hit his head. From hitting his head, he became unconscious. The footage also showed the unconscious boy floating around the river with not one lifeguard noticing. I recall coming in for that afternoon shift as a head guard as I watched the ambulances drive from our parking lot. What I didn't expect to see was my mentors and peers in shambles from the event that had just occurred. At that time, I was just 16 years old and looked up to my supervisors for ways to react and respond to situations. That day, I recall having to maintain my composure as I watched my team weep. At that time, we were scared, angry, devastated, and confused. How could this happen at our local water park? This incident was an eye-opener for how the intense crowding of the water affected the lifeguards' capability of maintaining their vigilance on the water. This date has changed the way the aquatics department runs the daily operations. As the aquatics manager, I share insight into the incident on July 3rd within every lifeguard class that I hold. Sharing the story is not to frighten the incoming lifeguards, but to provide them with an insight into how our daily operations and capacity levels have changed since this event. Today, I am grateful that most of the current lifeguards and management staff will never have to experience the incident within the years the water park capacity was above 500 people. The aquatics management team works hard to ensure all guest safety and employee safety throughout the Chesapeake Beach Water Park. Although our capacity did not change due to the specific safety reasons I am currently pointing out, the COVID-19 decreased capacity was necessary to show what major difference in safety the limited capacity had on the Chesapeake Beach Water Park. For years, the water park admitted as many guests as possible without considering the safety dangers of all guests and the mental well-being of employees. Increasing the capacity levels of the Chesapeake Beach Water Park back to numbers prior to COVID-19 may sound fiscally pleasing, but it is not worth the cost of the safety of guests and employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So just wrapping up with the path forward from the staff's perspective, is that high capacity numbers of over 500 do not provide an environment where guests and staff can operate safely. They also increase cost and risk significantly that are not accounted for in our current year budget. And they significantly decrease attendance by town and county residents. So we've seen over the years, as we have started to make changes, that we have a significant bump up of our town residents returning to the park. And there's, direct and indirect general fund and utility fund expenses that remain unaccounted for in the Chesapeake Beach Water Park budget. These expenses are incurred by the general taxpayers of the town. And so we need to be sure that we are accounting for all of the cost to operate the water park. And there's significant infrastructure improvements that are needed to operate the park. Both short and long-term range planning is needed based on town council's direction and town taxpayers' desires.
Good work.